All right, recording. Awesome. And as always, you know how much we love happy snaps. So is everyone happy to smile for the camera? Oh, hang on. We'll wait for Carolyn's on her way in. So we'll just let her in and then we can grab, I think, Chris. Oh, Chris, you're back. I thought you were trying to hide from the photo.
No, I just didn't want you to watch me blow my nose. That was all.
Oh, nice. Well,
we all appreciate that. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. Hey, Carolyn, good to see you. Okay, all right. I'll just take a couple, and as always, Bron is the exclusive photo vetter to make sure that everybody's looking happy and there's minimal eyes closed.
I make sure that we all look fantastic for the shot.
Exactly. All right. Okay, we'll get going. So look, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us as always. It's never a dull moment at the moment with all this COVID stuff going on. So no doubt some of you may be in lockdown, some of you may not be, some of you may be somewhere in between. So who knows, who really cares in some ways. But the point of today is we're going to debate some exciting issues, and we're going to go with a bit of an old school high school debate style format. So thank you, Ali, and thank you, Theo, for agreeing to bust this out for us. It's always good fun. So I guess the question we're going to be discussing today is what is really the priority? And probably it's very timely, don't you reckon, Bron, given the events of the last week or so, in terms of what wins in the constant sort of struggle and debate between public safety and I guess the disclosure of information in order to maintain public safety and effectively manage COVID outbreaks, or is it the right to privacy? And I think that is also, at the moment, feels like a bit of an underappreciated issue in many respects. And so Theo and Ali today are going to be debating one side of the argument each. We're not going to formally arbitrate a winner, but the point for you guys and your organisations is we want to at least start a positive conversation and give you some practical, proactive tips to take away and at least consider implementing internally to try and address this issue that, if it isn't already confronting you, will confront you in the coming months. So, Bron, over to you.
So in our current environment, we're all required to sign into various apps in order to register our presence at venues, cafes and other public places. So James and I are currently working across 3 different states in Australia, and we're required to register through a number of different and various state government apps, as well as complete various border declarations that allow us to travel. So one of the things that we often talk about is who's managing the security of our data and who are they sharing it with? And so prior to all of the phone-based apps as well, there was often people or businesses using paper-based like list systems, which gave other members of the public access to your name, your phone number and your email address as well. So it does beg the question, what takes priority? Is it the safety and security of our individual data? And what does that mean versus the need to ensure public safety through the tracking and the registering of all of our movements? And we know cybersecurity is a real and emerging threat for all businesses, one that's been further exacerbated through the COVID pandemic. So we do welcome Ali and Theo today to take us through the key points of the debate. Theo, we might start with you, if that's okay.
Sure thing. Thanks, Bronwyn. I'll give a little rundown on who I am, just for the room, if I haven't met some of you before. I often have a clash at the same time as this meeting, so I don't get to join every time. But my name's Theo. I'm based in Hobart, Tasmania, in Australia, and I am the General Counsel of a global technology company which specialises in selling cybersecurity software as a service. In addition to that, I am a keynote speaker, trainer and advisor, where I assist individuals with how to use their communication to demonstrate value. And what I try and do is help people to simplify their communication to amplify their message. So I do a range of things there. But today we are talking about privacy versus public safety. And this is a matter close to my heart. I love privacy, and I've advised on certain aspects of this in my current role and also my previous role as a lawyer for the University of Tasmania. So if we look at privacy, we understand that privacy and privacy laws are designed as a means of protecting individuals' rights around how their information is handled. Privacy laws regulate how personal information of an individual may be collected, used, stored, or disclosed by a company or by a government. So speaking broadly, when we talk about personal information, we talk about information or an opinion where an individual's identity is reasonably ascertainable. So that's kind of the general sort of definition that we see in Australian law, and it's pretty common in other jurisdictions as well. So privacy laws will not stop critical information sharing from occurring. So there are already, a number of obligations that are in place for employers to deal with, and things that they need to consider as well. I guess in order to manage a pandemic while also respecting privacy, employers and government should aim to limit the collection, use, and disclosure of personal information to only what is absolutely necessary to prevent and manage this pandemic, and take reasonable steps to ensure this information is secure. And that's an aspect which I'm not sure is completely covered, and that's a risk which is potentially unreasonable for us to in this current climate. I believe it's really important to find the balance between safety and privacy. So we need to ensure that one doesn't trump the other, but we still always need to consider the individual's right to privacy. We need to respect that individual's right, but also balance the need to protect public health. So, in certain circumstances, much of the disclosure of personal information should only be on a needs to know basis. And the law says that as well. So for example, if someone in the workplace has contracted COVID, it may be necessary to tell it won't be necessary to tell all staff the identity of the person who has contracted it. It may only be on a needs to know basis for people who have interacted with that ill person or who work on the same floor as that ill person, rather than a public statement to say that Susan from marketing is diseased and she's going to come and get you all with her COVID, so go home. But it is important, you could do like practical steps and reasonable steps to look at, Susan's calendar to see who she interacted with in the past few days. Who has she had one-on-one meetings with? Who's sitting near her? Was she at the morning tea for Deborah's, baby shower? Like, what exposure has she given to people? What is the risk to everyone else around her? These are the things you need to look at from a practical perspective, and you provide that information on a needs to know basis rather than a blanket, hey, this person diseased, avoid them, because that is quite concerning. But if we look at, I guess, that sort of health information aspect, information about someone's health and symptoms move beyond the realm of just personal information. That's actually now in the realm of sensitive information, and there are higher thresholds in place to deal with that information. So a company and government can collect health information about that individual only if the individual provides consent to its collection, and that can be expressed or implied, and not an or, but an and, the information is reasonably necessary for a function or an activity. And in this case, it is to manage a pandemic. So you've got to have both of those in there. So is an individual actually consenting to their information being collected? And we often find that, we get asked by government agencies anytime we check in, do you have a runny nose? Do you have a fever? Can you not smell? But, we're happy to provide that, but what's happening with that information? Where's it going? Who's using it? Where does it go beyond? We don't know. Are we seeing any privacy policies presented to us before actually giving this information? Do we understand our rights in relation to this information? There's an interesting aspect though. In Australian law under the Privacy Act, there is an exemption that consent isn't necessary for the collection if it's required or authorised under a permitted general situation under one of the APPs, Australian Privacy Principles. And this includes where the collection is necessary to prevent a serious threat to life, health, or safety of an individual or public health or safety. But is that being made clear to people? Do they understand that this right actually exists? Or are people willy-nilly just providing this information because they think, you know what, I have to. But something Bronwyn mentioned earlier is, you know, contact tracing, and we're so willing to just agree to check in here or there, but we don't know where that information is going, how it's being stored, what's the safety behind it, who has access to it, how long will government have access to it, will companies have access to it? In different states and territories in Australia, there are different apps being used. You have to sign up to each app. You have to provide information, your phone number, your email, your location, these sorts of, you know, these bits of information, which are of course really necessary to help, you know, track and trace and find out who's been near who. But is it being managed well? I mean, often we find that, oh shit, I forgot to check in when I got there, so I'll do it when I leave. So the timing ends up being off. And, you know, that sort of stuff. And then, you know, your information is being mixed amongst others, and, you know, who knows what sort of purposes that it is going to be used for beyond. Is it being deleted? How's it being stored? Where's the storage? Have I agreed to it being stored in a location outside of Australia, which is necessary under privacy law? We don't know. And why is this information not centralized in a way that, you know, it's only provided on the needs to know basis rather than be all or ends all? Like, who has this access to this information? We don't know. There's a lot of unanswered questions, and a lot of questions which aren't addressing the key issue, and that is an individual's right to privacy. Are they being afforded that in this situation or not? I don't know. But Ali, I want to hear from you. What do you got?
Perfect. There, I was going to give you the 1 minute warning, so you nailed that. So Ali.
Yeah.
I might need that because I might go a little long, so protect me. So
all right, your time starts now, Ali.
Haven't met. I'm Ali Muller. I'm the Managing Director of Goya Consulting. So we are a strategy, transformation and innovation firm, and we help organizations build innovation ecosystems, go through really large digital and strategy transformations, and help them grow. And we were having a really fun conversation about this one day on Clubhouse between James, Bron, Theo and myself. And I think Bronwyn Reid, I don't know if she's on the call today, and a few others were there. And this sparked some of us thinking, and there's some things that I'm going to touch on here that are really interesting. So I thank you, Theo, for bringing out all that information. So I'll cut out some bits of mine, which is actually probably quite good because it'll cut it down. But for me, this is the concept that I'm going to argue today that I've been asked to do by James and Bronwyn, which is that public health and public safety trumps privacy in the arena of a pandemic and how we need to get through that. But let's really define this. So what we're talking about here is the sharing of relevant information to help stop a public health issue. We're not talking about the defining elements of how we can actually look at defining a person. We're looking at what are we understanding to have the information that is going to be related to a possible COVID positive test, along with the information that all the places this person has been and potentially all the people that they've been in contact with. Now, we get this information, but we get it really slowly. So I'm going to argue that we can actually do this better. And we can do this better with the support of our people, our communities, our organizations, by not being so scared about some of these privacy issues. Because what are we really worried about? And I'll be honest, I don't really care if someone knows that I went to Woolworths on a Saturday at 1 o'clock, or if I went to the movies on a Monday night. I don't really have a lot of those problems, because the actual answer is, what are they really getting from me other than my location, my time, and my name? So we have to really consider that. And in times of pandemics, the health of our community, our loved ones, is really paramount. So this isn't about, breaking down all our privacy laws and considering this an Orwellian, obstruction into our personal rights and privacy. This is about what are we going to do to protect our community. So, but let's have a look at what some other parts of the world have really done, because it's a little different to what we've done. So, at the start of this whole outbreak in China, authorities required citizens in Wuhan to provide personal information so that they could have tracking devices on them and their mobile phones. Now, we're not doing anything like that. And if you're in Taiwan and you get put into quarantine or self-isolation, you get a geofence put on your mobile phone. So if you step outside of that, you are sent an automatic text message, and the text message is sent to the government. So we're looking at, wow, that's really different from what we see here. Singapore made the victims' information public to everyone so they could see that. And in relation to that, what people did was they created maps and apps so that they could track all these individuals that we're not talking about here, because that's actually quite a scary thing. And if we look at other countries in Europe, Germany, UK, Austria, Belgium, Italy, and then some other countries in Asia like South Korea, they actually got the mobile operators involved, and they created platforms where aggregated and anonymized information could be shared so they could track the movements of all the people that ended up with a COVID positive diagnosis, so that they didn't have to rely on the apps. And in Israel, they actually put surveillance measures in place so that all their citizens had to be tracked via mobile phones. Now, I'm not saying we take that Singaporean or that Israeli process of, naming and shaming victims or tracking everyone by their mobile phones. But what I'm saying is I think we need to have a much more pragmatic, community-focused mechanism. Because what we do know is that in Australia, we do have those custom apps. We do have state-based systems, but there's a huge but. The compliance on those systems is very low. And in some states, it's less than 50%. So what we need to think about is the public health and public safety is that we really can't track everyone and know where they are when something goes wrong, which then gives us these dreaded lockdowns, which we're in right now. And that's simply because we can't track and trace the way that they would like to, so that we can actually arrest, this insidious virus that's going on. Now, I want to talk to you about a couple of things that I've been involved with, which is I work with organisations across Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, and I have been involved in organisations across all 3 states that have had employees that are COVID positive. And in each and every one of those states, those organisations banded together and they wanted to support the community of employees that they have, and they wanted to provide very specific communications. They were
2 minutes, Ali.
2 minutes, okay. They were unable to do so by their health authorities. Now, what happens is there was a delay in 24 to 48 hours on what it took to get to those people and their people around them to actually give them the information. Now, we could have got there a lot faster with a dedicated, focused information communication out to everyone, and we could actually started that lockdown. Actually, we could have avoided one of those lockdown in Brisbane as a result. So what we need to question is, why are we able to do this for minors? So we can do this for childcare, we can do this for aged care, we can do this for school. The minute something pops up, whether it's chickenpox, school sores, gastro, you name it, we can send out these communications to the whole community. We can talk to them about it. And we've become blasé about it as parents because we see them all the time. But why can't we do this for COVID? Why can't we protect our community in the same way? And we need to be thinking about what's the real risk here. The real risk here is that, are we considering this Orwellian view in our mind? Have we been lambasted by the media to think that this is going to be something different than it is? And are we fearing that we can't have both, that we can't have digital privacy and that we can't have public health and safety? I think we can have both. It's just about how we do it together. So as boards, as leaders, as business owners, we really need to think about how we best look after our people and support our staff that may have a positive diagnosis, and those that don't, because they don't want to be infected and they don't want to potentially take it home to their loved ones. And we need to think about the impact that this has on the greater community as well, by not contacting people as fast as possible, by not giving them the information that we can as soon as possible. We have really, really large financial impacts on organizations, on the economy, and on individuals. And it may be a bit cold to think about, these economic impacts, but we really need to be considering that, because our people, not only do they want to be safe, not only do they want their loved ones to be safe, but they want to feel safe at work and they want to feel safe in their job. They want to know that they will have a job to go to. So we do have to manage those risks and what that looks like. And if we do have this information and we have it faster, it will allow us as organizations to plan better, to plan faster and implement plans in a way that we can not wait these 24 to 48, sometimes 36 hours. We can actually put them in place immediately and we can get moving on that. So it's not that we can de-risk a pandemic, but we can de-risk what's going on from a communications point of view, knowing that it is very limited information that we are going to support our people with straight away, and we can potentially prevent the spread in the community a lot faster. So
right, that's time, Ali. You're going to have to wrap it one sentence.
I'll wrap it up very quickly. So if we speak to people that are in organizations and we speak to people that are very sick, they actually want us to share this information. They want us to reframe our thinking. So they are happy for us to share their data. That just means that, you know, we need to think about how we think about the whole of the community rather than the individual. And I know for myself that I've seen a lot less flu, I've seen a lot less sickness, and we've seen a lot of people that are very happy with this. So I'm happy to have less flu and less sickness. I'm happy to share my data. I'd like everyone else to consider that too.
Wow.
Wow, well done, both of you.
Well done. Yeah, fantastic, Theo. Fantastic, Ali. That was excellent. So let's take a moment. I'll just quickly go back to check there's nothing I've missed in the chat box, but Andrew brought up a point to say that, you know, concerns about Zoom in terms of privacy. And I think, touche to that, given especially early on. Was it Rupert? Was it in Singapore where they hacked into Zoom early 2020 or something like that, I thought?
Yeah, they had some sort of streakers on school classrooms and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's actually still happening in Australia now. Zoom is still being hacked. Actually, one of the weakest platforms is Teams, which most organizations have gone to because they use the Microsoft suite. So nothing is infallible. It's about how we use it.
Exactly. So look, what we might do now, because we want to have some time for some open discussion. So thank you, Theo. Thank you, Ollie. They were both fantastic dissertations. Is that the right term? But I'm just going to go with it anyway. So Bron, over to questions. We wanted to throw a few at the two of you just to start, and then we're going to open to Q&A out of the audience. So Bron, did you want to lead it away with that first one and I can do the second one?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just mix it up because I've just thought of something else while we were chatting. Yeah. It's probably for Theo. So in terms of the workplace, because this is really the purpose of what we're trying to do today, is to understand what does this mean for me in a workplace if I'm a health and safety manager, a HR manager, a risk manager, whatever, or just a person running a business. What would probably be your top 3 do nots for a workplace? Making sure, you know, this, and this, absolutely don't do this.
That's a good one. I guess one thing is don't make a public announcement to everyone in the company if someone does have COVID. So don't send a bulk email out. Hey, everyone, hope you're having a great day. Guess what? Susan has COVID. Don't do that.
Can I ask a question on that though?
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. So I'm working with a company at the moment that just had a really major outbreak of chickenpox. And so not COVID. But they sent an email because it's actually in the film industry. So they have very strict timeframes, people and everything. So they need to get this done before their big actors fly off overseas.
Yeah.
They sent an email out to everyone to say, we've had an incident or 3 incidents of chickenpox in these departments.
Yeah.
And they were told not to do it by the health department. They did it anyway. Everyone was really happy about it because it meant that they could actually go into their little teams and isolate. And you know what we have to remember is in that industry, if people don't work, they don't get paid. So I know that they did a breach, but it just meant that everyone worked together and there was a huge amount of empathy for the people that were sick. It wasn't a victimization or a problem. It was around how do we keep the production moving and how do we keep everything going? I just thought that was a different view.
Yeah, but I think the point, Theo, that I think you were raising versus what you've raised, Ali, would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, Theo, what you're saying is don't name the individual, whereas Ali, what you're saying was you're the business, you're talking about listed departments. One thing to list.
There's only about 50 people there. You could narrow it down, but you know what I mean. But I was interested in that concept. They were told not to do it by the health department. They did it anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because it is an unauthorized disclosure unless you have the person's consent to do it.
They do.
So yeah, if they say, hey, look, we know you've got chickenpox or COVID or whatever it is, are you okay if we let everyone know, because we don't want, there could be people in a high risk category. If you were to like go to that active consent process, get it in writing, and have agreement from the individual that you can do that, you're ticking off those compliance boxes if you really needed to do that. Otherwise, you could just say, look, someone in the team has come down with COVID. As a matter of safety, we require everyone to stay home, get tested. Please check yourself for any symptoms. There's just other ways of doing it rather than naming and shaming. So I think that's probably the number one thing. Don't make someone feel bad for getting COVID and then throwing them, I guess, out there in the world to potentially be the victim of like oh my God, you came into work and you might have COVID. Like, shouldn't you have known? But you could be
no one wants to be the limo driver, right?
No one wants to be the limo driver. Exactly. That's probably number one. Number two would be, I must not. Think about your process for collecting information, like ensure that there's actually clear guidelines around how you do it and what it's going to be used for. So the must in that case is must have a clear policy around, hey, we're going to ask you these questions, but the purpose of that is, and it will only be used for XYZ. So the must not is, don't just do it without any clear guidance as to what is happening with it. For example, when people visit, like I've been visiting like an external law firm for some stuff, and they'll say, hi, thank you. Yeah, in order for you to speak to this person, we need to ask you these questions. Have you been overseas? Have you been here? Have you been there? Have you been there? Do you have any symptoms? And then I get a little spiel saying, hey, okay, great. Just so you know, you've provided this to allow us to protect the health and safety of our people. Where the only thing we're going to do with this is keep it on record to say that you don't have any problems and whatever, and now you can proceed through. Thanks. So that's been good. And the third would be, I guess, don't keep paper records and ensure that you have appropriate safety of information that you do collect. How is it being stored? I think that is such a critical thing, because you don't want this information out there for anyone to grab, and stuff being on paper isn't great from a safety perspective. It goes into the wrong hands, someone loses the folder, people leave stuff in a taxi, whatever it might be, it can go missing. You've got people's names, you've got their numbers, it could have who knows what else on it, depending what you've collected. So don't be shitty with your storage.
Nice. All right. Well, let's move on, Bron, so we don't chew into too much open discussion time.
Good advice for life there.
Good advice for life. That's it.
So I'll throw one out there for you. So, and probably this is for both of our debate panelists. So given the importance of both sides, what actions do you think we should, so we've covered the do nots or the should nots. What do you think we should be taking in terms of positive practical action in the workplace? So Ali, I'll go to you first on this one.
I think some of this is actually about how we're managing the communication around this and supporting our employees in this space so they can understand exactly what's happening. So it is really important that if they are giving information, they understand where it's going, how it's being treated and how it's being stored. And we need to openly communicate about that. And we need to also make sure that it's only the correct source of people inside the organization that are communicating. We don't want the rumor mill, the scuttlebutt and all that's going on. So I think it's really good for organizations to have a plan to get in front of that and manage that, because people live on fear. a little bit. We do have some problems with the media and what they're doing in this space. And so I think as organizations, it's how we embrace them, provide them the right information and support them through this journey so that they're operating with the correct information rather than, filling the gaps in their mind with the, whatever they think, might be happening in that space.
I think that's a great point, Ali. And I think I look at my parents, and no doubt some of you may have parents that way. I feel like it's almost, I'd call it like hysteria porn that they love digesting in the media, that they read everything that comes out of the ABC, the Sydney Morning Herald, every possible media source, and they ring me up constantly telling me, don't you know this? And it's all this sort of like skies falling in narrative. And it's just this, like you said, Carolyn, as well, there's some real interesting stuff going on in the media. And I think Theo and Ali and Bron and I talked about this. I'm only speaking personally. I don't have much confidence in them at the moment. And I think they've shot that pretty hard over the course of the last 12 months. And they've got a lot of ground to win back with anybody that's actually got a brain cell in their head. So Theo, I'll go to you on that point as well. Yeah, what's that? If it bleeds, it leads. Great chat going on. So yeah, what should we do, Theo? And then I reckon we'll go over to open chat. Do you reckon, Bron?
Yeah.
Yep.
I guess what we should do. So I agree with Ali, like the open a communication source, that's super important and be really clear. And part of that is, as we understand, privacy is a consent-based mechanism. So you just need to communicate to people, what are you going to do with their information? How are you going to use it? How's it going to be collected? As long as people understand and provide their consent for that, there shouldn't be any issue. And then, what are the circumstances of not consenting? Well, all right, if you're not going to consent, you're not coming in. We're not going to let you into the store. We're not going to let you into the building. That's the individual's choice. If they don't want to consent to that, then go home. So really it's about that communication, being clear about, what is happening with this information, how it will be used, who's going to see it, how's it going to get disclosed, all of that sort of stuff. And if people understand that, then, that's a decision they've made and we're all good to go. And, it's good for public health. It's good for the community. It's good for the employer, good for the individual.
It would be similar or aligned to Theo and Ali, a bit like organisations where they have people with other types of injuries like workers' comp and what. You don't go around telling everyone so-and-so's, injured themselves or hurt their back or whatever. You don't disclose when they went to a doctor or, there's all sorts of other medical information organisations collect via their sort of injury and workers' comp stuff. And so apply the same principles. Don't go around sharing things inappropriately and only collect what you need to collect. And when you've got it, make sure you secure it.
Yeah, exactly. And then when something happens, like if something was to happen in this space and there was an outbreak in an organisation, it's utilising that information to think about a lessons learned process so that you can educate and learn from it, as opposed to, sharing information willy-nilly that's going to be incorrect. Totally agree. It's what we do with that that's going to make sense.
Yeah.
And it probably links into, Bron, what we talk about with a lot of not-for-profit clients, that they're often not very good in the disability community, not-for-profit space, for looking at those events in the media and asking themselves, could this happen to us? And I think that's a really good query to be constantly asking at a top level, at the board sort of CEO level. So sorry, Bron, over to you.
So there was just a couple of things, and sorry, and then after that I'll shut up, but I'm just really interested. So a couple of things probably for our panelists around, usually when there's some sort of event unfolding, often there's a whole load of risk. There'll be reputational risk, financial risk, health and safety risk, blah, blah, blah. There's all these risks attached to all of these things, and you'll often get your crisis team kind of prepped and ready to go. I would imagine that if an organisation actually had an outbreak within their office building or their space or wherever they are, I would imagine that they're probably, it'd be prudent to at least prep your crisis management team so you can start to get legal and insurance and everyone else all over this.
Absolutely. Number one, there should already be hopefully a crisis management plan in place. People have thought about business continuity issues, like, all right, if these people aren't here, who takes over? If they're not here, who takes over? Are there external people? You know, how do we contact everyone if they're not connected to their work stuff? Is there like a mobile we can use? You know, all of that stuff. There needs to be like a solid plan in place. And with that, I guess, you know, crisis communication, like how do you communicate this to staff and how do you deal with that sort of thing? And, you know, the like, do you have, you know, everyone's contact details for the resources you need? Do you have your insurance broker accessible? Do you have like a WHS expert on hand? Do you have your legal? Do you have your HR, whatever it might be? So yeah, just being ready, having that plan in place to just go when you need to.
The other thing is that plans are great. Let's have a piece of paper. Let's have a plan.
Sorry, I'm getting Zoom bombed here. Apologies.
It's all good. But I've worked with a number of different organisations around this over the last, say, 18 months or so, and almost all of them found that their communications broke at some point in time. So it wasn't that their plan was wrong. It wasn't that they didn't have the right people in the crisis management team. It wasn't that they had a bad strategy or they'd thought it out. But when they went to implement it, their systems broke because they never tested their systems. So there's an organisation that I work with that needs to contact 50,000 people at any point in time. They were only ever able to get to 14,000 people of them because their systems weren't working. They didn't update emails, phone numbers, all the different contact information. So it is a lesson here around, you know, how do we make sure the full end-to-end system works, not just the theory of it. And I think that's something that we need to think about in this.
And I think often it's the testing of these systems before the event that let most organisations down.
Exactly, they don't do it. It's a set and forget. We believe it's going to work. You know, my employee that I hired 14 years ago, why would their phone number have changed? These are the things that they don't think about. So we need to make sure information's up to date and what we do in that space. Some of these organisations are critical organisations, and if we can't contact them, they can't work. So you're right. It's about testing the whole process.
Yep, and a good sort of like pivot into that as well from Daniel saying, you know, that certainly, I think this just emphasises the importance of standing up emergency management committees as you've suggested, business continuity planning, all the things that people like this group kind of bang on about to our organisations or the organisations we support all the time. So no surprises. So look, Bron, would we go now to some open questions? And apologies.
I don't want to dominate. I've got a million questions, but anyone else from the floor who might have questions?
I just think a good case study at the moment is with the West Australian government. I think that, you know, collected private information for the purposes of COVID check-ins and those sorts of things, indicated that it wouldn't be utilised for any other purpose other than knowing where you were in contact tracing. And, you know, we've just seen that it has been accessed by law enforcement, and, you know, the backtracking on that is, if they read the fine print, they would have known that was the case. And that just, you know, raises a few, you know, concerns for me. And I guess I just wonder, you guys might be a little more across that particular case, but it is a very interesting case in regards to what we're talking about right now.
That's amazing. So they collected information in relation to COVID, and then somehow the police ended up with it and were using it for purposes other than that.
I think Ali might have a better, give us a rundown on it.
State like Queensland is also a state that has cross-functional purposes of data when you register them inside government organisations. And there will be emergency management situations where they can access that data. No, as far as I know, that hasn't happened in Queensland at all, but WA is a little rogue on a few things, so I wasn't really surprised when I saw that. So, and the reality is, what information are they getting? They're getting your location source. They're getting your name, and they're probably getting, and I think they can get some information off the phone when you scan it. So yes, that has to happen, but that is actually the reason why we have such low compliance rates on those apps. So, which is why I believe that, you know, we have to have a better community approach to how we do these things all together, because we're never going to get this right. And now that that has happened, Andrew, we are going to see lower levels of compliance because more people are going to be scared about what happens to the data because that's been mismanaged in that way. And perhaps the Western Australian government could come out and talk about why they did that, and that might actually alleviate some fears, but they won't, I'm sure.
No, I was going to say Saint Mark can do no wrong. So if he admitted any sort of fallibility, wouldn't it detract him from his secular saint status in the eyes of that state? So,
so this may be very well played out quite seriously in a case where a bikie was assassinated at an event, and certainly they've requested the data from the COVID check-ins. And so there'll be a very serious test here of people's privacy in regards to this matter where now the issue was this guy allegedly got assassinated by someone 300 metres away by him being shot by a rifle. But it's certainly that they have asked and requested for the COVID check-in information to assess who was there and potentially link back to this potential assassin. So, there are cases that are being tested very seriously now around this, but I think more importantly, certainly at Surf Life Saving Queensland, we've had a process in place where we are alert but not alarmed. And when we are notified of someone who has gone and been subject to a test, we certainly alert the group involved to say that a member of your team has gone and sought a test, and you need to make a decision whether you want to self-isolate at home, and we suggest you also go and get tested. Now, that's only just a precautionary thing to say, it's up to the individual to make decisions about their personal health and circumstances. It doesn't raise the issue around privacy because we said someone has been tested, but also, the decision about whether you want to stay at home and get tested yourself is yours. We don't demand that, and certainly we wouldn't until we had a positive indication that the person had tested positive. So certainly from our point of view, the paramount is the person's privacy, and then obviously the health and well-being of the rest of the staff. And at no point in time we would ever consider outing someone who had actively gone and alerted us to the fact that they had gone and sought a test, or that they were ill and gone and for whatever reason gone home and made a decision to go and get tested. It just simply didn't come up on our radar. And certainly from all of our policies and procedures, it's well covered that, privacy is paramount in regards to any issues around health and well-being.
Carolyn, did you look like you had something to add to that, or? I think you're still on mute. Yeah, no, you've got to volume up or on mute. No, still pretty low. Still audio. Dan, do you want? Whoops, we'll come back to you, Carolyn. Yep. Chris, I was going to go to you for a second because I thought there was some really interesting, parallels in that discussion around this issue that I think a few of us have called out now. And I can see that Rupert's saying that, Trace Info was used to track people on police radar. But I think that the issue that comes to mind for me there is this concept of the conscientious objector to things like COVID vaccines, or people that refuse to, to go through the QR code process. I think, Bron, you might have heard it. There was an issue in the mid-north coast of New South Wales the other day. It looks like a fight went down when somebody refused to check in, and they ended up
occupational violence.
Ended up punching on with the owner of a restaurant in Foster or something like that. And I think that's kind of, all part of this debate as well. And I'd like to hear what you're sort of picking up from that and what we've heard today, Chris, and then we'll come back to you, Carolyn.
I don't have a lot to add there. I think the conscientious objector, which I can pronounce properly, always is they're a pain in the ass to this system, and excuse my language there, because they create the person who doesn't want to sign in. The irony of it, they're still carrying a phone, which can be traced anyway. They posted all on Facebook that they didn't want to sign in to go into a particular venue. So you sort of have all these weird anomalies with your conscientious objector. They're not really consistent in how they do things. I think it's just creates a lot of white noise, and part of what we were saying about the media before generates a whole lot of misinformation and propagates through the wrong channels more hysteria around the wrong things. So I think that's the challenge that I have with the conscientious objector, which is when we talked about the vaccine, how do you try and squash that in the workplace? And I think Ali and Theo covered it off really well in just making sure that we're communicating clearly back to the workplace, and there's a clear plan in place on how to do that so that you have accurate information going back into the workplace, because that's where they become a real disruptor. And I think that's what you have to avoid. So
thanks.
Yeah, that's kind of where I sit with that a bit.
Yeah.
Just off the
Thanks,
top of my
Chris. Thanks, Chris. Sorry, Carolyn, are you good to go
that's
now?
okay. And I must apologise.
There we go.
Not at all. All good. Go for it.
I was going to say the new Denton's work from home arrangement arrived at a box yesterday with me on the way home. So I have spent most of the day under my desk plugging in new cables because I've recently moved firms. So I don't know how it works yet. Look, one of the things we've got at the moment, and for those of you who I haven't met, I'm a regulatory and compliance lawyer. Recently joined the Denton's corporate team, having been in-house with a little firm for a lot longer. We have a matter at the moment, it's an ASIC investigation, so they're exercising their powers under Section 19 of the Act and examining the officers of a company in relation to suspected misconduct. But we've actually been asked if we will consent, which is just curious because I don't think they actually have to seek our consent, but to hand up that information so that they can check the movements of these officers. So it's an insider trading investigation, but they're actually looking for meetings in coffee shops and whatnot last year. And it was fair to say I had some pretty strong views on that in the examination about whether that would be handed over. But just curious in terms of that, even ASIC has worked out that there is this pool of information which may help them join the dots on what they haven't seized under a Section 33 notice.
My favourite point is the way you said even ASIC, because I feel like the way you said even ASIC, because I feel like they've got this reputation as being a bit of a dinosaur technologically wise. So it's good.
Yeah,
to
well,
see.
that's precisely my inference.
Yeah.
So
This is
Where did you land?
Our discussion today, and I've raised this one about this issue with this assassination. Do people think that it's okay that a policing authority, and ASIC's another example, should get access to this data for what is considered to be the greater good versus a person's individual rights to privacy, and to not be identified that I might have been somewhere that I didn't want people to know about? So this really goes to the heart of this conversation today, doesn't it? What do people think that there is a right for these, police or for ASIC, these regulatory authorities, to use this data for the greater good, if you want to call it that?
I think we have to. It's a really interesting point, Daniel. It really is, because it's like one of those things. It's like we have to probably question: would they have access to it anyway? Now we can probably argue in the bikies case they may have been able to find that information through the ticketing of an event, but in terms of the ASIC case, no. If that was pre-COVID, they wouldn't potentially been able to have understood the movements of those people. So that's a really massive grey space, and I don't know what the answer is, but it's definitely something that we do need to think about and debate.
One of those things that's going to get tested in the court system.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other layer there, Ali, is we split up the regulatory authorities. So if we're talking about the police, but I think we've got people who are properly trained to be investigators and detectives. And if we're talking about ASIC, we're talking about a bunch of accountants and lawyers. It's a very different.
They certainly have been trained to investigate, don't you?
Oh no, absolutely, and that's the space I'm in. So I know that it'll eventually end up with the CDPP, but case briefs as they're prepared for the CDPP can look very different if an accountant or a lawyer has decided to join the dots on bits of information that they've collected. So it's
and then where does it stop? So if we take this back to an organizational level, if we wanted to test an organization, if they were doing an investigation into an employee, would we then be able to draw up that information to find out where that employee was? Were they working? Were they at the movies? Were they at a coffee shop? Were they actually on a Zoom call? Were they this? It's a really interesting grey area that Daniel's bringing up here that I don't know where we're going with this. So what does it look like? And, you know, as organisations, we probably shouldn't have access to that. So we have to think about where do those boundaries lie? It's a big spectrum at the moment.
Can I just ask a question, Caroline, assuming you may have looked into this? And excuse my ignorance in having not read it. I feel like a bad solicitor for it. The terms and conditions of signing in with regards to the COVID app, do they clarify whether or not it can be used for other purposes outside of contact tracing? Like, is that specified?
There's an oblique reference that there might be data sharing, but I'll leave it, it's oblique. So what you need to do is go to other legislation and other policy and work out which regulatory authorities are working together.
Sorry, Rupert's just had his hand up for a while, so yeah. Sorry, Chris. Rupert's just had his hand up. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Rupert.
Yeah.
No worries. It's sort of been answered, but in terms of a lot of the comments in the chat, a lot of the law enforcement have access to information that you kind of give away anyway, and they increase, and it depends on your location and the agreements that law enforcement have with social media companies and others, which is becoming a country by country sort of debate that a lot of countries are trying to flex their muscles a bit more with social media to gather that information. But what it comes down to is what Ali was saying, it's about trust and boundaries and oversight. So if you're talking about that's going to be country and maybe in your case, state dependent. So the police, from my experience and my prior life, we're not really interested to take the quote from here about who went to Woolies. We're trying to rule people out of inquiries if you're trying to identify the right people. However, there are other agencies that could fudge it. My concern as someone sat outside of Australia is the competence of these authorities to actually hold your data securely. Because we saw, for example, that the Garmin data was hacked by state-sponsored espionage, and that was then sold to insurgents, and it was showing stuff like where US troops were doing their training and their runs around the bases in Afghanistan, etc. So there's different people who have different levels of vulnerability in different countries for whom their data has potential value about where they are. For you and me, nobody's probably going to care, but there are other people who are more at risk. So it then becomes a question about the competence of the authorities to actually secure. And also the other thing we haven't talked about is how long it's been held for, when it's been deleted and disposed. And those sort of issues, I think, haven't really been addressed thus far, particularly when we're starting to get data now about, I don't know, how long COVID might stay in someone's system if they're asymptomatic, and those factors. I haven't heard any chat about deletion of all of this tracing data or how it's going to be properly disposed. So the authorities knowing where we go, I think that we're kind of it's a bit like locking the stable door after the horse is bolted on that one. My concern is more about the security of the data, it not being expanded to too broad a group of people who have access to it, particularly groups that aren't regulated. And then the disposal of that data.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that hasn't previously been covered, Rupert, in terms of, what is the, let's call it the storage lifespan on that data, and what are they going to do with it? And I think, Carolyn, we probably don't have time to go into it too much detail, but it probably links to what you put in the chat earlier on about who was it that the details ended up in the AFR?
Yeah,
and
the poor merchant banker that was looking at the Barbecues Galore assets, that it just looked like he was looking for a barbecue part as we went through his contact tracing list. But lots of those things happen, and I must say, for all of those in law and corporate advisory, it makes us all shudder a little bit, because we've all done the covert weekend, let's go and check out all of the assets of what our client wants to acquire. So it's one thing to check in and obviously do all of the right things. it's obviously a different thing for the AFR to then, get a hold of it because it's mildly comical, and blow up that deal. Like that, even I looked at it and went, wow, he was obviously after something very specific for his barbecue. We're sort of having the same thing right now in Queensland with the young health worker who has gallivanted around our state for 10 days and had a 3-day holiday on Magnetic Island and gone to the farmers markets. That this morning, her brother has tested positive and they've named the school, which is a really large private school here. So you watch it interplay, and I'm like, at some point, we probably don't need to interview the school principal about what he thinks about having one student with COVID. Like, it starts to narrow it down to a point that isn't particularly helpful for anyone.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the debate in general. And look, we're probably going to run short of time, so I was just going to do a quick wrap, and then Bron, did you want to do your closeout points, and we'll go from there. But look, I guess so. What I'm hearing overall is, so we've heard two very significant, weighty arguments on the two sides of the debate. And hopefully all of us have at least got our brains going on overdrive in terms of the practical things that we can do at an organisational level and the things that we must not do. I think certainly the factor that, as Rupert put forward, the lifespan of data storage is a significant factor that also needs to be addressed in that. And they were probably the key takeaways for me. So Bron, what about yourself, just as we wrap it up?
Yeah, so look, for me, I think, because having that sort of HR background as well, we always know that we need policies and procedures, and whatever we write down, we do what we say we're going to do in our policies and procedures, and we follow them. So I think what's going to be really important for all organisations, if they haven't already done so, is to make sure they document how they're collecting data, what they're using it for, stick to it, and make sure that they've got some response procedures built around, if we have, someone test positive in our workplace, we will do this. If we have someone who's deemed to be a close contact, we will do this. So having some structure and be on the front foot about it is really, I think, some of the best protections to what I've heard and taken out of today. And then also from a cyber point of view, just making sure that wherever you're holding your data, that it's secure, that it can only be accessed by those that need to know, I think. So they're probably some of my key takeouts from today.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important point, as Theo said, that it's got to be used for appropriate, necessary purposes. But then on Ali's side, it's also, we could be better and more agile at the way we do it, at the way we're responding to this without potentially breaching privacy at the same time. So look, I was just going to say, I can't thank Ali and Theo enough, and I'm sure everyone else feels the same way, for putting in the time to research those two sides of this very complex issue. I think we knew we weren't going to come to some sort of formative conclusion, but as always, hopefully we've got the discussion started and you've got some practical things to walk away and use for your organisations. So look, everyone's a winner. And so look, the next month event, what Bron and I will be doing is we're going to be leading more of a technical presentation, given that there has been a very recent release of a code of practice in New South Wales, at least, for managing psychosocial risks in the workplace. And I think there's some really good bits about it, but there's also going to be some significant hairs on it from an employer's perspective. And we thought that we could at least introduce the debate, discuss what's in the current code and how employers can practically respond. So that's what we've got coming up next month.
Right.
Excellent. All right. Well, look, as always, thank you so much for your time, guys. And sorry, Bron, I jumped in over the top of your head.
No, I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for coming along, and hope that you got some great takeaways from this discussion. I think it's very healthy and very useful for us to all to keep talking about these things. So thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Hope everyone has a great afternoon and catch you soon.
See you next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ali and Theo. That was really good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hey, guys. Bye.